This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ICG's Digital Academy webinar series. I'm Sally Alsop, the ICG committee member responsible for running our webinar programme. So for today's webinar, we are delighted to welcome Mike Stevens, who is founder of Insight Platforms and What Next Strategy and Planning, and also an ICG member. Mike is a leading consultant and publisher at the intersection of technology, research and analytics. He has over 20 years experience in agencies, software and consulting firms, including Kantar, Alida, formerly Vision Critical, and KAE Marketing Intelligence. He works with research teams, technology companies and agencies to help them build skills, choose partners and plan for change. His website, Insight Platforms, is the leading directory, events and e-learning resource for digital research methods and tools. Mike wants to make it clear that this is not for AI experts, this webinar, but for everyone else. And in his webinar, Mike will provide a simple introduction to some key artificial intelligence concepts and some practical examples of tools that researchers, analysts and marketers can use today. As usual, there'll be a Q&A session at the end of Mike's talk, so please, when we come to that, those of you on webcam, raise your hands if you have a question. If you prefer to remain anonymous, please type your question in the chat box and I'll read them out after the hand-raised questions. Can you all please make sure that your microphones are on mute as well, because there is some background noise happening. Okay, so the webinar is generously sponsored today by Insight Platforms, so the leading resource for digital tools and learning used by more than 150,000 people annually. Insight Platforms offers a directory of software, data and service providers. They host regular events such as free webinars, demo days and virtual summits, together with a range of e-learning courses. So before I hand over to Mike, here are some more events and webinars that the ICG provides and which you might be interested in. So please visit the ICG website for more information on each of these, but make a note in your diaries of the upcoming events towards the end of February and for March. Don't forget that we're able to offer great value sponsorship opportunities with each of our webinars. Sponsorship normally costs £120 for a lot of exposure on our website, mailers and social media, and of course on the day, and anybody listening afterwards. Please contact Lucy if you'd like to know more. So our speaker today is Mike Stevens of Insight Platforms, and I will now hand over to Mike. If I can
Thanks, Sally. Do you want to see my face?
Yeah,
hang on. It's coming.
Can
Can you let me share as well so that you can see my slides?
Yeah. So you should see a pop-up.
Great. Okay.
Brilliant. So I shall turn off.
Can you see?
Yeah,
okay.
We can. That's good. Over
Great.
to you.
Okay. Thanks, Sally. Thanks for inviting me to present some stuff. Some of you, I know some of you will have seen bits of this before, but some of it's new. So feel free if you want to tune out or grab a cup of tea on the bits that you know. You know, the aim today actually is just to do a bit of a whistle stop through, you know, some artificial intelligence tools before AI becomes like a sort of naff, meaningless phrase, which I kind of think it may already be getting there, but banking on it not quite being there right now. There's sort of 10 or 12 different areas, and I've tried to highlight ways in which you know, small agencies, independent researchers can actually make use of some of this stuff. So I will be giving as many tips as I can for stuff that's practically usable. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the background about, you know, what is AI and where does it come from and the history and all of that stuff. I'm going to talk about how you can use it. And the first area I'm going to talk about is text analytics. And this is, you know, it's just such a broad area. There's so much language analysis and so many models now with the ability to to understand unstructured data, that it's kind of infusing lots of different applications. Really useful one is for verbatim coding. And a few companies that are, I know there was I missed it last week, the Chattering Monkey presentation. I know that they've got a product that focuses on that. Kaplana, Swiss company, uses machine learning for coding verbatims. Canvas, which is a US business that also does a similar thing, but puts a kind of emotional layer over it. Both of these will also pull in data from other sources, not just open-ended, survey responses. So, it's being applied in a practical way. You might have come across Codeit. I'll put some links throughout this so that you can go and find out more if you want to. There's demos that you can watch on the Insight platform site. Codeit takes a slightly different approach and integrates with quite a few of the survey platforms. And what they recognize is that actually it's very, very hard to do a fully automated, entirely machine learning based approach to open-ended coding, because there are just so many nuances. There are so many very specific types of survey that people get asked to do. And an example might be that a machine might highlight more spice needed as a theme from a verbatim comment about developing food products for the Indian market. So in reality, what that actually boils down to is needs a bit more garam masala, needs a bit more of this or that. So it's very, very specific, and it's very hard to train an AI model to do that in a fully automated way. So Codeit has this kind of hybrid approach of mixing automation, machine learning, artificial intelligence to kind of quickly do the basics, but then will allow you to adjust that on the fly. And mostly it's used by manual coding teams, but it helps them massively reduce the amount of time that they take. But it's something that's quite intuitive from a generalist researcher as well. Okay, the other big area of text analytics in research is a lot of these companies that are doing customer experience analytics, and that is taking feeds of text data, unstructured data from all sorts of different sources. So it might be support tickets that that are submitted on the website for help, technical support. It could be complaints. It might be transcriptions from call centers. It might be reviews. It could be any number of different things. And pulling those into one place and then building a model, so a framework for analyzing it. And those models actually, again, need to be very nuanced. So Chattermill is one of the early runners in this space, a UK-based company. Actually, as with a lot of these things, they have a lot of people wrapped around the technology. So a lot of consultancy, a lot of research expertise to make sure that the automation is actually working properly, and it's constantly in refinement. So they have to build a lot of customized approaches. ProdSite is at the other end of the spectrum, actually. So there's been a lot of growth in the lower cost tools for this sort of thing. So, if you were looking for a solution as a small agency or researcher, then, ProdSite may be a place to start. Again, you can see all these different sources that it pulls in. So it might be App Store reviews. It might be, things that come from Amazon, from call centers, whatever. A lot of it is survey based. So, and a lot of it's used for NPS, coding of NPS feedback, but much more standardized and highly automated. So, but there's dozens and dozens of these things that you can look at. If people have got questions as we go along, I don't know if that's well, there's actually quite a lot to cover. I've probably got too much stuff here, so maybe best to put them in the chat or leave to the end. Right. Audience intelligence. This is really social listening, but it's not social listening because it covers so much more than that. So loads of tools from the very basic. I'm not saying Synthesio is basic, but there are some very, very basic tools. I use this free one called Brand Mentions. It's rubbish, to be honest. I wouldn't bother. But it's effectively what a lot of the basic ones are just doing, are going counting words, counting the number of times that your brand, your company, your competitor appears, and it's very functional stuff. Then you get, more nuanced stuff that's still based on social. So, you've got Brandwatch, Linkfluence, Synthesio, which was bought by Ipsos. Very much, a kind of research framework for for social channels. So again, understanding, what are people saying in a category? How are people, talking about brands over time? The reason that I think it's worth calling it audience intelligence rather than just social listening is that there are so many more channels of data that can now be included. So you look at something like Pulsar, which was ultimately a social listening platform, has evolved a lot. So I don't know whether you can see the detail on this slide, but so again, pulling in things like TripAdvisor reviews, comments on news sites. So things like Discuss, which is a common commenting platform that runs across different publishers. So lots and lots of different types of content that comes in to be able to build a much bigger composite picture. And what's really interesting is where the kind of combining some of the search and actually social and search data with surveys and more kind of primary research methods to combine those. So there's a really good webinar by Francesco, who's a founder of Pulsar, that talks about with NBC Universal how they were able to map a segmentation with questions they were able to replicate to identify those segments on social media to track people on segments that have been identified in research. So it's the integration of these things, thinking of it as a broader audience capability. But underneath it, it's the same kind of technology. So it's AI, it's machine learning, it's natural language processing, which is the the branch of AI that deals with words. So that's that. Again, this is kind of related as well. The underlying technologies are very similar, but trend analytics and forecasting has become quite big. You've probably seen a lot of the work that Pepsi have been doing, with Black Swan actually. So Black Swan, one of the early, kind of runners in this space, figured out that if you've got enough data and you can build the right models, you can start to predict trends for consumer behavior, for adoption in certain categories by harvesting all of the things that people are talking about in social. So you can spot things that are relatively early in the adoption curve. You can try and understand how do we capitalize on that. There's a case study that it's been done to death, I think, but it was like the Unilever Lipton Pepsi Lipton joint venture, the matcha tea, how they identified that as an opportunity way before it was actually getting big, so they were able to get ahead and actually start building brand and product around it before any of the competitors were piling into that market. So again, it's the same types of inputs, but the algorithms are very different, trying to understand what's got momentum, what's got what's actually growing in terms of trends and pace. Another company that does this is NetBase Quid, and they'll take in both public sources of data, but also private sources. So for companies that have, let's say, large volumes of internal R&D content, they've got lots of working papers, they've got lots of research they've done internally, you can effectively hoover that up and then have a language model that understands, what is relevant that's happening out there in the world that people are talking about, and how does that tie into, to existing knowledge within an organization. So really, it's about trying to pull as much relevant unstructured data into one place and make sense of it to build a predictive model. Writing copy. This one's quite interesting, and I don't know if any of you subscribe to what's his name, the Exponential View, Azim Azhar. He's just actually published a great book about sort of technology and society. And his email a couple of weeks ago actually had a whole section that was written by this Jasper, which is an automated copywriting tool, and it's used for a lot of it is used for creating headlines. You can see, copy for subject lines and emails, but also increasingly for blog content. And it taps into, you may have heard of the GPT-3 model, which is the OpenAI, the thing that Elon Musk is involved in. And this thing's written novels, it's written comedy scripts, and it's basically the biggest language model that exists. They've put so much stuff into it. That's also become very dangerous because it's become quite toxic the way it's trained on a lot of the stuff that's in social media and on Twitter. But so it's very easy for the thing to go off on one. But the use of AI based language generation. This is not about analyzing language now. This is about creating language. Has just skyrocketed. I mean, I look at a lot of marketing and digital marketing tools, and there's so many now that are very, dirt cheap, selling the ability to automatically write blog articles that's optimized for Google search. And you just feed it with a little starter thing, and then it will populate the rest of the article. I never tried it because I'm a bit precious about that stuff. But maybe even within the kind of niches that we tend to work in, maybe it's worth giving a go. But the reason to talk about this is, I think for certain types of generic report writing or introductions, I think these types of tools are going to become much more widely adopted. Because for a while, we've had tools like Wordsmith from Automated Insights. And what this does is for structured data, and there's a lot of stuff in journalism where this came from that is actually quite repetitive and structured. So sports reports, quarterly earnings reports for listed companies, where if you're basically talking about the same thing regularly, so you can train a model. It's a bit like fill in the blanks. So when the data comes out, you take a data feed, you can actually generate narrative. And so, the stuff that's written there in the dashboard is generated by the computer, but driven by the data that's in the visualization. And, this is used in tools like Zappy these days. I think other platforms are using it, but to give a little narrative to the automated survey results. So when they've done a concept test or an ad test, I mean, it's relatively banal stuff. So it's original cheddar was the winner, blah 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 blah. It's really kind of filling in the blanks type stuff. But you can you think about how much time has been spent by researchers writing banal commentary on boring outputs, particularly repetitive things like concept tests or brand tracking. There's scope for a lot more automation of this type of thing. Okay, transcription and translation, and this is this I think is increasingly useful for qualitative research and international stuff. Oh man, don't speak. Go silent. So there's a company called Reduct.video, which is quite heavily focused on the user research space, but gets is very usable. And for things like if you do one-to-one interviews on Zoom, I'm doing a bunch at the moment to write some case studies for a client of mine, interviewing on Zoom. I'm uploading them into one of these tools for automatic transcription. It makes it searchable for the conversation, so I can actually pick out the relevant bits. So it's these things are becoming pretty widely adopted. They're used for for meeting notes, for all sorts of things. There's a company called Grain. I've tried it. I wasn't that impressed, but you can give it a go. That's one of the earlier runners in this. You can have the slides if you want. Anybody can have the slides to this. I don't mind. There's I think Tom Woodnut sent around a link to Spoke, which is another one that was going cheap for a little while. So these things are really helpful. They're embedded in a lot of the specialist qualitative research tools now. So if you use like a Hatch Tank or Recollective, the automatic transcription and translation actually is starting to become a lot more usable. So you can see there's links on here where you can go and you can actually watch demos of these tools if you want to. But it's transcription, automatic translation. Some languages work better, some accents and voices work better. It's it does still vary, but it's improving all the time. Conversational surveys. This one is this is quite an interesting area, and it's given how much, I think most of us recognise that traditional quantitative surveys have been pretty heavy, pretty dull for people to take. The participant experience has been rubbish. We're biasing our responses with these kind of like long grids and all that crap. So there is, AI has the potential to unleash something quite different. And there are some people who are playing with avatars for this type of thing, with what is it, synthetic humans. I can't think what the website's called, but there's, I think over the next few years, I think we'll see some very, very different types of interfaces. I'm going to talk about Inca. Inca, actually, a good friend of mine and ICG member Phil Sutcliffe has just joined to help them grow in to help them grow their business here and in Europe. So Inca is effectively it's like a kind of chat surveys interface. So you design your survey. It's much kind of quicker and easier for participants to take, but you can build in probes that will be triggered by certain things that are said in open-ended responses. So the participant experience is much more interactive and engaging. You can do, it's not just about kind of chat stuff. You can do things like card sorting or drag and drop images. So all of that can can happen on the thing. And then it's got kind of on the fly analysis at the back end to be able to work out what are people saying, how do you build a sensible narrative. I think one of the things that you get is just a much richer verbatim responses, open-ended feedback. It just tends to be much more considered. And there's some work to be done to figure out, okay, do you also get more differentiation when using a scale, that type of thing, versus a traditional method. So I think this is the conversational survey space is a really interesting space. There's a company called Group Solver that also does this. You might be familiar with. They have the ability to embed, conjoin even in a conversational research design. So it's not that it's just limited to kind of frivolous chit chat stuff. It's you can do proper research with it. There's a demo there for Inca on the website as well if you want to have a look. And it's it kind of overlaps. It's related to this idea of qual at scale. I think the MRS is doing another of these events where it's big qual. I think they're talking about it. I imagine quite a few people on this call will, like me, think it's not qualitative research in the same way. It's really it is it's unstructured inputs at scale, but I'm probably fighting a losing battle on that one. But Remesh is one of the early and well-funded and high-growth companies in this space. So they've done a lot of stuff, up to 1,000 consumers at once, and it's you have the ability for participants to kind of score each other's answers. You get this kind of like live on the fly bubbling of ideas that come to the top. It's been done for for things like copy testing, for optimizing campaign language, that type of thing. Lots of applications there. It's actually some cool stuff that Remesh have done. I've not seen any recent headlines on it, but using the technology in working with the UN in conflict zones, trying to actually get people who've been displaced or people who are actually at odds with each other because they've been fighting to participate and to to build more connection that way. I've not seen how that's gone, but interesting and slightly more noble application of the tech than trying to sell whatever this is, frozen ready meals. Okay, image recognition. So computer vision is the kind of umbrella frame for a lot of these technologies in AI, machine learning. And if you've got a smartphone, it's doing this all the time on your photo library, unless you go deep into settings and turn it off. But the photos that you take it's the models are now identifying the place that you were, was it sunny, were you with people, so it can deconstruct the content of images, makes it searchable from a kind of consumer application, from a business marketing application. Lots of uses in things like tracking visual brand mentions, given how much more visual communication is becoming, how many through TikTok, Instagram, Snap, there's so much there that is a data point to understand how's my brand being, talked about, being used, how big is it? It should be another component alongside brand tracking. So Brandwatch, when they bought Crimson Hexagon, they folded in their image analytics part of that, and it's kind of a big part alongside the language analytics of tracking brand mentions. Technically, you ought to be able to do more sophisticated stuff with it. I don't know whether Brandwatch supports that, but companies like Signoi, which again, automated semiotics, which I know some people on this call will grate against as a concept, but the idea is that you can scrape the data that's in lots of images and posts on social media, and you can build a composite picture, so you can identify brand codes, use of color, the types of imagery that different brands are using, compare them. You can have it as very much as a kind of brand planning or an audience segmentation tool. So there's lots of different ways in which that image recognition as a kind of fundamental AI technology has been applied for some pretty practical and sophisticated research methods. There's Andy Dexter, the founder of Signoi. There's a webinar on the Insight platform site. If you want, all of these things are free to watch. They're all on demand. So anytime you want to dig deeper, I can't do justice to all this stuff in 20 minutes. And another one with Aim Power, which is a kind of sister company to Decode Marketing. Some of you may know Phil Barden. Again, this is actually some very cool applications here, trying to predict purely on the strength of an open-ended response to a concept, trying to deconstruct that language, understand to what extent is that predictive versus concept tests that involve you rating and agreeing with various different statements, and actually some pretty strong correlation that says simple, but using that type of AI prediction is just as powerful as a standard concept test. Lots of other things there that they've done with analyzing shelf imagery with kind of automated image analytics for content copy optimization for image optimization. Right, video analytics. I mean, this is, it's the same type of application because it's just obviously lots of pictures stitched together. But Big Sofa's, I think, doing some really interesting work in this space. They are, again, more and more companies are hybrids of kind of professional services, of researchers, of analysts, of data scientists, alongside some cool technology. So Chattermill we talked about earlier. A lot of this is becoming more hybrid consultative, so people with tech. And Big Sofa, a lot of what the work that they do does need quite a bit of analyst time to build the models to start with. So they'll put cameras in homes, obviously with people's consent, to understand, what are the dynamics around mealtime occasions, what are the dynamics around cleaning, around pet care. There's all sorts of different applications that they've had for, counting the number of people by the roadside to figure out sponsorship exposures on the Tour de France, that type of thing, where you've got, how the hell would you do that without a model? So you train the model to actually count humans using footage from the support cars and that type of thing. But there's some really clever stuff that they've done. Some great insights into, what people say versus what they actually do. People generally go, no, I never feed my dog human food, whatever. But, when they've done these pet care projects, everybody does. And, some depressing but maybe unsurprising insights into the kind of gender balance of housework. So the reported behaviour that men claim to do and the actual behaviour. Women underestimate and do far more, men overestimate and do far less generally. But it's proven with a lot of this video ethnography. But again, using AI to actually catalogue who's doing what when and and create more structured analysis. Right, emotion AI. This is a big section, but I'm gonna skip through it because I'm gonna overstay my welcome. But it's what the hell is it? So obviously we've got a lot of new knowledge and theories and frameworks. System 1, behavioral economics, the kind of the unconscious motivations, and we're starting to. Those theories of psychology are marrying up with a lot of the actual neuroscience to say we know human subconscious is driving a lot of this. If you haven't read this, I recommend it. It's fantastic, and it debunks a lot of stuff that we know that we think around kind of Ekman's, standard emotions, standard expression of emotions, that type of thing. But it's a very, very good book. Anyway, lots of new theories of emotion that are coming out. So when you ally that with low-cost sensors, tons of data, the ability to train lots of models, what you've got is loads and loads of AI applications that relate to human emotion, engagement, excitement, whatever that is. There's quite a few different examples that I'm gonna skip through here. Language, I don't think I'm going to touch on just because we've done that. But the text analytics models, there are several of them, like Heartbeat and Canvas that we saw earlier, that have an emotional component. So trying to understand the emotional content of language as a key output. But facial expressions, quite a few companies that do this. Realize is one of them. Really, it's effectively taking at a pixel level and then training a model to go, if this pixel moves in this direction, then you build a kind of composite bottom-up model to say that ultimately is a smile, that's a frown, that's an expression of joy, that's a laugh, or whatever it is. So Realize is used a lot. I think Unilever may have invested in them. They do a lot of work with Mars on pre-testing ads, trying to ensure that their output is much more kind of emotionally relevant. Skin conductance. So this is about trying to identify the extent to which your skin conducts electricity is a proxy, or can be a proxy for emotional arousal. And Mindprober done some great work in this around sports broadcasting and engagement with media. They've got a panel of people who, while they're watching content, will have this thing strapped to their wrist. They'll also have an app that allows them to give them more rational feedback as well. So they map those two things together, can identify where the peaks and troughs of excitement and engagement are in media broadcasting. Touch interactions. This company Mao has built a model that says, when I'm stabbing my phone like this, then that suggests that I'm in a certain emotional state. When I'm kind of like nice and casually scrolling, then it suggests something else. So, they've built that model as a way of trying to diagnose, user interface issues or whatever else might be going on. Decibel, company that was bought by Medallia, has a similar type of thing for kind of like mouse. When people get their mouse and they go on a, you can see this example where there's a form with ridiculous things that you have to fill in. People get cross and they waggle their mouse and they stab it a lot. So there's actually, they've done try to correlate people's digital behavior with emotional state. Tone of voice. There's a few companies actually in this space. Ordering, a German company that will take the recordings from call centers or from market research interviews, and has a model to infer emotional state out of that. Brain activity. This stuff is becoming much more accessible. So for even for small companies now, these emotive headsets, they might only have 5 or 7 sensors on them, so they're never going to be the kind of rigor that you'd get in a proper neuroscience lab. But you can do some, more and more stuff with cheaper and cheaper hardware, $200 or $300 just to buy one of these headsets now. And companies like Entropic. So, where the real power of all this stuff lies for emotion AI is not saying, okay, that little smile was the thing that, it's really about building a composite measure to go, okay, if we look at eye tracking, if we have some implicit research, if we have some brain mapping, can we actually build a composite picture of what's really going on, not relying on an individual metric? So, Entropic, Indian company, has various different applications for media testing, for shopper, for UX research. There's a demo there on the website. Knock yourself out. Element Human, another one, which is again combines eye tracking, facial coding, implicit responses, rational surveys, but also has these kind of mock-up environments so that you're testing stuff really in situ. So things like a virtual Instagram feed or a TikTok feed where people are responding as they would in the wild. So it's kind of in context ad testing as much as possible using these emotion AI tools. So there's a couple of things here that might be helpful. People go, oh, facial coding, it's like Big Brother and it's evil. But there's a good white paper there that says actually what's the difference between facial recognition and emotion recognition or facial coding. So worth a look, and you can also see a demo of the Element Human platform there. There's a load of stuff actually. If you're into this, we did a virtual summit. It's like 12 or 15 presentations from October last year. Lots of cool companies sharing their stuff. So there's big sofas on there. I forget who else was involved, but it was there's a lot of good content on. Some of it's behavioural science. There's I think Lumen eye tracking. I think Richard Shotton also presented on the kind of behavioural science grounding. So yeah, there's some good stuff there. All right, last couple of sections. Sorry for those of you who need to run. Automated eye tracking. This is, I don't even know what to call this. It's kind of visual analytics, but it's basically applying visual models of attention that have been gained either academically or through lots of historic eye tracking learning, and saying we don't actually need to track people's eyes because we can predict where people will look. So Dragonfly is one of these. So you upload a bit of stimulus and it says which bits are going to draw most attention. Attention insight, again, another one. There are actually dozens of these companies, and some of these are really cheap, and they're being sold as tools for designers, so digital designers who can quickly upload a couple of different versions and figure out, are people going to pay attention to it? Some of these are better than others. There's if anybody knows Mike Follett from Lumen, he has a kind of characteristically punchy writing style, so this is worth a read. It's fairly balanced, but it's like, well, what's the role of these automated eye tracking things versus real eye tracking? And it's like anything. It's if you're just feeding constantly with historical stuff, you're only ever going to get the outputs of the automated stuff within a narrow band. The real insight is always going to come from doing some real research, right? But what if you take that one step further and go, well, can we get away with survey outputs that don't need respondents? Can we model based on all of our historic knowledge and get rid of those expensive and annoying participants? Well, so Zappi has this, digital prediction tool where, trained on all of the historical ad tests done, you can actually upload an ad for free. And I've given it a whirl on an old Guardian ad from the 80s. It kind of works, gives you some very basic stuff, but it's worth a look. The kind of 200-pound gorilla or whatever it is of ad testing, obviously, is the whole Miller Brown link catalog that's on the Kantar marketplace now. So they've got a couple of 100,000 historic ad tests that they've built a predictive model called Link AI, and that actually has some more sophisticated outputs. Again, though, even though it sounds like a big number, I think this is not being billed as a substitute for doing primary research. It's maybe it narrows down the field, maybe it gives you some pointers in the creative development process. It's not going to substitute having real people give you real feedback. All right, so we're doing an event in May. If you like this sort of stuff, we're just putting together the speaker lineup, the next month. We are actually going to have like a startup, if I can get enough companies, like a startup showcase for new companies in the space, just to kind of show them off. But we'll have panel discussions, we'll have masterclasses and some other stuff there. So that runs over 3 days in May. So sign up, it's free. That's it. Sorry, I know you said 30 minutes, but I always do that. Wow, that's a massive question. How predictable can trends be if you have enough information? Honestly, this is like what's that? The huge big budget thing that they've just done on Apple TV, Foundation, which is amazing. Asimov was writing in the 50s and 60s and hypothesized that if you got the maths right, you could actually make long-term predictions about, galactic empire decline. Yes, with more and more data, you can get better at predictions, but there's always going to be a massive fudge factor. So some of those things, more on the money than others. The Black Swan thing, great that they helped, Pepsi and Unilever develop the matcha tea opportunity. But there are always other factors that come into play. So yes, you can pile in historical data, but it doesn't guarantee that it's going to come to pass. I'm not sure how much more accurately I can answer your question.
Thank you, Mike. That was quite a scary talk from my perspective, but absolutely amazing to see how many different types and tools there are out there using AI. I'm just wondering, while we're waiting for more questions to come through, whether you've got any idea of what the market research industry is going to look like in the future, taking into account all these new tools. I'm beginning to use just the transcription services, so I'm a keen fan of Otter AI, for example, but
Yeah.
realistically, how is our role going to change in the next 5-10 years? How do you see us using these tools, or our clients using these tools, and therefore our job evolving?
Okay, so I kind of see it as a bit of a layer cake, really. So I think that there are really good opportunities for research companies that embrace the technology and become kind of hybrid. And so, for instance, there's a lot of stuff that we were doing 5 or 10 years ago that was very manual around, okay, I'm going to test another ad concept, and 10 different people would be involved, and now clients technically can upload it a lot, themselves. They can upload stimulus, they can test it themselves. I think, though, the reality is there's going to need to be a lot of much more expert knowledge and advice and consultative capability around. But what does that mean? I mean, you can democratize and devolve access to lots and lots of people, but if they don't really know how to understand what's going on, so I think there's huge scope for the kind of consultative end of things. I also think there's a lot of scope for researchers to kind of automate and productize what they do and become much more efficient as data pipelines, which, to be honest, a lot of research agencies and suppliers have effectively been data pipelines, just using people to do a lot of the projects instead of some of these tools. So I think there's those two layers. There's the kind of high value premium consultative thing. There's a highly automated thing in the middle. I think whoever's left in the middle of that, there's a danger of getting quite squeezed, because if you're not adding premium value and you're not becoming more efficient as a data provider, you kind of squeezed a little bit. But I mean, I would include a lot of the work that ICG members are doing in the kind of consultative space. It tends to be more niche, specialized, a bit more experienced, a bit more and I think a lot of these tools are things that are quite easy to have a play with, to get demos, to see how they might marry up with existing ways of working, whether it's direct qualitative work or adding in a kind of social listening component. I think these are becoming much easier to try these days.
Fantastic. Does anybody else have any more questions out there? Anybody want to raise their hand, turn on their webcam and ask something while Mike's here? Oh, there's another question from will machine learning AI be used for education purposes?
Yeah, but I could do with a bit more context as to what you mean by that, Ahmed. So yes, absolutely, and I think it is being used by some of these education platforms, by the online learning platforms, to figure out how well people are engaging, or what they need. But I mean, yeah, I'd be good to understand a little bit more behind the question, to be honest.
You want to come
Yes,
back,
is the answer.
Mohammed, or anybody else have a question?
Anybody else?
Okay, just great whistle stop Cook's tour. Thank you, Mike, from Jeff.
Just yeah.
It looks like everybody's spellbound, Mike. So I think we're all
Into silence. All right.
by the information you provided. So I mean, thank you so much for helping demystify some of this, because there is an awful lot out there which I was totally unaware of. Thank you everybody else for for logging in, and we hope that you will join us at a future webinar. There are plenty more, as I said, coming up in later this month and also in March. So do look on our website to see what other events we've got coming up. Yeah, thanks again to Mike for his time today, for taking us through this. Mike, just a quick question. Will you, I know we've got the recording, will you be sharing your slides as well so that people
yeah, if people want them, I don't mind. I'll send you a PDF. Yeah, that's fine.
That's fantastic. Okay. Thanks very much again, and thanks to everybody for logging in. Have a great afternoon. Bye all.
All right, thanks everyone. See you later. Bye.